Marcus Reed didn't wake up one morning and decide to hate white people. That part mattered, at least to him. He told himself his anger was learned, absorbed, inherited from a country that had never truly healed. Marcus was born in the late 1980s in Cleveland, Ohio, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs and still found time to warn him about the world outside their door. Be careful how you talk to police. Keep your hands visible. Don't argue, even when you're right. Those warnings stayed with him. But what shaped Marcus most wasn't something that happened to him. It was what he watched happen to others. By his late 20s, Marcus lived alone in a modest apartment, working remotely as a data analyst. Quiet job, quiet life. Too quiet. When the pandemic hit, silence filled his days, and his phone filled the gaps. Social media became his window to the world, and the world looked cruel. Every day there was another video. A man pinned to the ground, a woman dragged by her hair, a slur shouted from a passing truck, comment sections laughing, arguing, denying. Marcus scrolled endlessly, telling himself he was staying informed, but the truth was darker. He wasn't just watching, he was absorbing. The algorithm noticed what held his attention and fed him more of it. Rage became a routine, outrage a ritual. He joined online groups that promised clarity. At first, they spoke about history, slavery, redlining, mass incarceration, things Marcus already knew, things that made sense. Then the tone shifted. The conversations became sharper, more absolute. They benefit from the system, whether they admit it or not. Silence is violence. There are no innocent bystanders. Marcus didn't argue. He nodded along in silence, his jaw tightening with every post. The idea that all white people were complicit settled into his mind slowly, like sediment at the bottom of a river. Not sudden, not dramatic, just there. He told himself this wasn't racism, this was accountability. His sister Angela noticed the change before anyone else. "You're always angry," she said during a video call one night. "You want me to pretend everything's fine?" "I want you to breathe," she replied. "You're taking the weight of the world on your shoulders." But Marcus believed someone had to carry it. He stopped hanging out with coworkers, stopped returning calls from old friends. Conversations felt pointless, small talk in a burning house. Online, at least, people understood. They spoke with certainty. They offered explanations for pain that had no clear outlet. One post stayed with him. "If the system won't feel our pain, make them feel fear." Marcus stared at the words longer than he wanted to admit. Fear. That was the language America understood. He began replaying memories, not of personal harm, but of secondhand trauma. A video he watched at 2 a.m., a story he read during lunch, a comment that dismissed centuries of suffering with a joke. Over time, Marcus stopped separating individuals from the system. Faces blurred, nuance disappeared. White skin became a symbol, and symbols, he told himself, didn't deserve sympathy. The first time he acted, it barely felt like a crime. It was late. The neighborhood was quiet. Marcus walked past a house with an American flag hanging from the porch. He didn't know who lived there, didn't know their beliefs, didn't care. He spray-painted a word across the garage, one that accused, one that blamed. His heart pounded as he stepped back, breath shallow, hands shaking. But beneath the fear was something else, relief. For the first time in months, the anger had somewhere to go. Nothing happened the next day. No news, no police cars. The house cleaned the graffiti and moved on. But Marcus didn't. He replayed the moment over and over. The control, the release. Soon, one act wasn't enough. He justified each step carefully, building a moral staircase that led downward. Vandalism became intimidation. Intimidation became confrontation. Each time he chose targets based on nothing more than appearance. People walking their dogs, couples leaving restaurants, men loading groceries into trunks. In his mind, they weren't individuals, they were representatives. Marcus ignored the contradictions, the white woman who apologized when she bumped into him, the older man who held the door open, the social worker flyer he tore down without reading. Those details complicated the narrative, and Marcus no longer wanted complexity. He wanted clarity, good and evil, us and them. Online, his language hardened. Posts turned into manifestos, comments into warnings. He spoke about justice and retribution, about a reckoning that had been delayed too long. Followers encouraged him, strangers praised his courage. No one told him to stop. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't see through the fog of anger, was that his digital footprint was growing louder. Patterns were forming. Local incidents, once dismissed as random, were beginning to connect. And somewhere in a federal office, a file with his name didn't yet exist, but it soon would. Because anger, when left unchecked, doesn't burn out, it spreads. And Marcus Reed was only at the beginning. The first time Marcus hurt someone, he didn't use his fists, he used his words. It happened outside a grocery store on a cold Friday evening. The parking lot was crowded, carts rattling, engines idling. Marcus was already tense. He had spent the entire afternoon arguing online, defending a post that claimed neutrality itself was a form of violence. By the time he shut his phone and stepped outside, his hands were shaking. A white man in his late 40s brushed past him accidentally, mumbling, "Sorry about that." The word sorry landed wrong. Marcus turned. "Watch where you're going," he snapped. The man looked surprised. "Hey, I said sorry." Something in Marcus broke open. Months of swallowed anger rushed forward, searching for a target. "Must be easy," Marcus said, louder now. "Bumping into people and expecting forgiveness? That's privilege." People slowed down. Someone stared. The man raised his palms. "I don't want trouble." But Marcus did, or at least he wanted release. He stepped closer, words spilling out sharp and fast, accusations about history, complicity, silence. The man didn't argue. He just backed away, confusion written all over his face. That should have stopped Marcus. Instead, it satisfied him. That night, Marcus replayed the encounter the way some people replay a song they love. He remembered the man's discomfort, the way his voice cracked. It felt like power, ugly but undeniable. He told himself it was harmless. No bruises, no blood. Just truth. Soon, words weren't enough. Marcus began choosing places where anonymity protected him. Dimly lit streets, crowded events, unfamiliar neighborhoods. He learned how to move unnoticed, how to blend in, how to walk away before anyone thought to stop him. One evening, he followed a couple for 2 blocks before confronting them, accusing them of gentrification because of where they lived. Another time, he knocked a coffee cup out of a man's hand and walked away while the man stood frozen, shocked more than hurt. Each incident was small on its own. Together, they formed a pattern. Marcus started documenting his actions online, not with details, but with coded language. Accountability happened tonight. Conversations were forced. People responded with fire emojis and praise. Some asked questions. A few warned him to slow down. He ignored the warnings. Deep down, Marcus knew he was crossing lines, but he had built a moral loophole big enough to walk through. He wasn't attacking people. He was attacking what they represented. Symbols don't bleed, he told himself. Then one night, he met Ethan Walker. Ethan was everything Marcus expected to hate. White, well-dressed, calm. He was locking up a community center after an evening workshop when Marcus approached him. Marcus had seen the flyers earlier that day, something about racial dialogue and community healing. To Marcus, it sounded like performance, words without consequences. "So you think talking fixes this?" Marcus asked, stepping into Ethan's path. Ethan looked up, startled. "I'm sorry?" "You think conversations undo centuries of damage." Ethan hesitated, then sighed. "I think silence does more harm." That answer confused Marcus. It wasn't defensive, it wasn't dismissive. It sounded sincere. Ethan explained he was a social worker, that he'd spent years advocating for housing reform and police accountability. He spoke carefully, choosing his words like someone used to listening. Marcus didn't want to hear any of it. The story in his head needed Ethan to be an enemy, a villain, proof. When Marcus shoved him, it happened fast, too fast to think. Ethan stumbled, hit the pavement hard. His head struck concrete with a dull, sickening sound. For a moment, everything stopped. Marcus froze, staring at the man on the ground. Blood pooled beneath Ethan's head, dark and real. A woman screamed. Someone shouted to call 911. This wasn't symbolic. This was flesh and bone and consequence. Marcus ran. He didn't stop until his lungs burned and his legs shook. When he finally collapsed in his apartment, adrenaline drained away, leaving behind something cold and heavy. Fear. He turned on the news the next morning. Ethan Walker was in critical condition. The segment showed a photo, Ethan smiling beside a group of teenagers at the same community center. The anchor called it an unprovoked assault. Marcus felt nauseous. He waited for guilt to overwhelm him, for regret to crack him open. Instead, his mind went to work. If he hadn't been there, if he really cared, he would have known better. This is what happens when you benefit from a violent system. The justifications came faster now, smoother, less effortful. Still, something had changed. Marcus started carrying gloves. He wiped down his phone more often. He avoided cameras. His actions grew more deliberate, less emotional. Anger had evolved into strategy. Angela noticed it immediately. "You're scaring me," she said over the phone. "This isn't activism, this is obsession." Marcus snapped back, telling her she didn't understand, that comfort made people blind. When she mentioned the man in the hospital, Marcus went silent. "You don't know that was me," he said finally. Angela didn't answer. She didn't need to. After that, Marcus stopped calling her. The attacks escalated, not in frequency, but in intent. He began planning instead of reacting, mapping routines, watching patterns, convincing himself that fear was necessary to wake people up. What Marcus didn't realize was that fear works both ways. People reported incidents, security footage was reviewed, online posts were flagged. Analysts began noticing the language, the repetition, the timing, the ideology behind it. Marcus believed he was invisible, but belief once acted upon leaves traces. And somewhere far from Marcus's apartment, those traces were starting to line up. Marcus always believed the system only noticed people like him when it was too late, after damage had already been done. That belief gave him comfort. It made him feel untouchable, like a shadow moving through blind machinery. But systems evolve. What Marcus didn't realize was that his actions had crossed an invisible threshold. What once looked like isolated confrontations were now being reclassified. The language, the intent, the ideology, together they formed something law enforcement recognized all too well: bias-driven violence. In a federal building hundreds of miles away, an analyst paused on Marcus's online posts. The phrasing was familiar: moral absolutism, collective blame, justification through history. The same phrases appeared again and again, across different platforms, tied to the same geographic area. Patterns don't need names to exist. Yet, Marcus sensed something shifting before he understood it. The streets felt different. People were more alert. Security cameras seemed more visible. A man at a bus stop stared at him too long, or maybe Marcus just noticed it now. Paranoia crept in quietly. He stopped posting publicly and moved to encrypted chats. He erased messages, wiped metadata, and read guides written by strangers who spoke with alarming confidence about staying ahead of the state. Each precaution made him feel smarter and lonelier. Sleep became difficult. When he did sleep, Ethan's face appeared in fragments. The fall, the sound, the blood. Marcus woke up sweating, heart racing, then lay still, reminding himself why it had happened. Necessary, inevitable, part of something bigger. He repeated those words until they lost meaning. Angela tried one last time. She showed up unannounced on a Sunday afternoon, standing outside his apartment door like a memory he couldn't lock out. When Marcus opened the door, she studied him quietly. "You look empty," she said. "I'm focused." "No," Angela replied. "You're gone." She told him about the news updates. Ethan had survived, but with permanent brain damage. He would never return to his work, never fully live the life he'd built. Marcus felt the words land, heavy and undeniable. For a moment, something inside him cracked. Then he sealed it shut. "People get hurt every day," he said. "Now you care because it made the news?" Angela's eyes filled with tears. "You're not fighting injustice, you're feeding it." When Marcus didn't respond, she stepped back. "I don't recognize you anymore," she said softly. Then she left. Marcus watched her go from the window, a familiar ache settling in his chest. He told himself loss was the price of clarity, but clarity shouldn't feel this hollow. The FBI task force didn't rush. They never did. They mapped timelines, compared footage, matched writing styles, a partial license plate here, a geofence ping there, a pattern of movement that suggested planning, not impulse. Marcus had grown careful, but not careful enough. One evening, as he sat in his car across from a quiet park, waiting for the man he'd been watching to finish his jog, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He ignored it. The jogger never came out. Instead, 2 unmarked vehicles rolled in silently, blocking his exit. Red and blue lights exploded across the windshield. For a split second, Marcus considered running. Then he remembered his mother's voice. "Keep your hands visible." He stepped out slowly, heart pounding, the world narrowing to commands and flashing lights. Agents cuffed him, firm but controlled. "You're being detained in connection with multiple bias-motivated assaults," one of them said. Marcus laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "You don't even know what you're talking about." The interrogation room was cold and neutral. No accusations, no shouting, just facts laid out carefully, one by one. Screenshots, videos, timelines. His words, stripped of context, displayed back to him. Detective Laura Mitchell leaned forward. "You wanted people to feel fear," she said calmly. "Congratulations, you succeeded, just not the way you planned." Marcus felt the walls close in, not physically, but mentally. The narrative he had built for himself began to crumble under the weight of reality. He wasn't invisible. He wasn't righteous. He was just another man who had let hatred do his thinking for him. As the door closed behind him, Marcus realized something too late. The system he believed only punished others had finally noticed him, and it was done listening. The holding cell smelled of bleach and regret. Marcus sat on the cold metal bench, his hands cuffed, his mind replaying every decision that had led him here. Silence pressed against him from all sides, an oppressive, inescapable quiet that felt heavier than the flashing lights, the interrogation room, and the stern faces of the FBI. He thought about Ethan Walker, the social worker who had tried to make the world better, whose life he had shattered in seconds, whose existence had become a scar in Marcus's own psyche. Marcus had justified it, rationalized it, argued that it was the system's fault. But now, even his justifications seemed brittle, hollow. He remembered Angela's words. "You're feeding the hatred you think you're fighting." They were simple words, but they cut deeper than any law enforcement report ever could. For the first time, Marcus considered the enormity of what he had done, not as abstractions, not as symbols, but in real human terms. The faces he had attacked, the panic he had caused, the lives irrevocably altered. No ideology, no history lesson, no argument about justice could erase that. Detective Laura Mitchell returned to the cell. She did not yell, she did not accuse. She just sat across from him, folding her hands. "You believed you were fighting something greater than yourself," she said softly. "You believed that fear could deliver justice." Marcus wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her about the anger he had inherited, the injustice he had witnessed, the worlds that had forced him into this role. but there was nothing left to argue. Even his own mind recoiled from the narrative he had built. "You were a monster," Mitchell continued, "but not because you were born that way. You became one because you let hatred become your reasoning. You became what you swore you were fighting." Marcus stared at her. For a long moment, nothing moved in him. The reality of the word monster was impossible to escape. It was not a label anyone had given him. It was one he now recognized in the reflection of his own mind. He thought about the online groups, the echo chambers, the algorithms that had fed his anger. He thought about the small moments, the first shove, the first word of blame, the first taste of control. Each had been a choice, not fate, not history, choice. And now, choice had consequences. The trial was swift. The media reported his crimes with careful language: bias-motivated assault, domestic extremist ideology, anti-white hate crime spree. Marcus's name was everywhere, stripped of any romanticized notion of heroism. He had believed he was righteous, a soldier for justice. Now he was just a cautionary tale. In the courtroom, he saw the people he had hurt. Some had forgiven, some had not. Some were silent, their expressions unreadable. Each glance was a mirror reflecting the pain he had caused back onto himself. The sentencing was harsh but fair. Years in prison, counseling, permanent records. Marcus would have time, plenty of it, to sit with what he had done. Alone in his cell, he began to understand that revenge, anger, and hate could never heal injustice. They could only destroy the human being carrying them. He realized that he had believed in symbols more than people, ideas more than reality, and in doing so, he had lost himself entirely. Marcus Reed had tried to fight hatred with hatred. He had tried to avenge the wrongs he had seen by creating fear in innocent people. And now, with nothing left but time, he finally saw the truth. The only enemy he had ever truly fought was himself. For the first time, he wept, not for his anger, not for the ideology, but for the simple, devastating truth that hatred does not heal, it devours. And in that quiet, cold cell, Marcus Reed faced the hardest opponent of all, the monster he had become.